Hello and welcome to Classic Motorsport Podcast. I'm Gareth Thomas, and today we're looking at an F1 legend that raced Formula 1, became world champion, went to America to Indycar racing and won that before coming back to Formula 1, and it became a flop. And that's the career of Nigel Mansell. Mansell had a fairly slow start to his racing career, using his own money to help his way through the banks. After a successful career in karting, he moved up to Formula Ford to the disapproval of his father, and in '76 Mansell won 6 of the 9 races he took part in, including his debut at Mary Park, and did 42 races that year, won 33 to become the 1977 British Formula Ford champion, despite suffering a broken neck in a qualifying session at Brands Hatch. Doctors had told him he would be precariously close to quadriplegia, that he would be confined for 6 months and never drive again. Mansell discharged himself from the hospital and returned to racing. 3 weeks before the accident, he had resigned from his job as an aerospace engineer, having previously sold most of his personal belongings to find finances for into Formula Ford. Later that year, he was given a chance to race a Lola 570 Formula 3 car at Silverstone. Finished 4th, moved up to Formula 3. Mansell's first season in F3, which was '78, started a pole and a second place finish. However, the car was not competitive, as a commercial deal with Unipart required his team to use Triumph engines, vastly inferior to Toyota engines used by the leading teams. Part of the company from the team at the end of '78, and the next season drove for David Price Racing. First win at Silverstone in March, 8th in the championship. His racing was consistent, but a collision with Andrea de Cesaris resulted in a huge cartwheel crash, which he was lucky to survive. Again hospitalised, this time a broken vertebrae. His driving was noticed by Colin Chapman, owner of Lotus, and shortly after his accident, hiding the extent of his injuries with painkillers, Mansell performed well enough to do a trial at Paul Ricard with Lotus. A number of other drivers determined he was going to take the second seat in 1980 alongside Mario Andretti. Carlos Reutemann, the team's second driver, having decided to leave Lotus for Williams. Driving the Lotus 79, the seat eventually went to Italian Aero De Angelis, but Mansell was selected to become the test driver for the Norfolk-based team. Mansell's skills as a test driver, including setting the fastest lap while Silverstone in a Lotus car at the time, impressed Chapman enough to give him a couple of F1 starts, driving a development version of the 81, which was the 81B. In his debut, the 1980 Austrian Grand Prix, a fuel leak in a cockpit that developed shortly before the start of the race left him with painful first and second degree burns on his buttocks. An engine failure forced him to retire from that race and his second race at Zandvoort. An accident at Imola for the Italian Grand Prix meant he failed to qualify. Team leader Mario Andretti wrote off his car in Canada, so Mansell had to give up the 81B that he was planning to drive in America for Andretti to compete in the United States Grand Prix at Watkins Glen. Andretti decided to leave Lotus and drive for Alfa Romeo, leaving Lotus with a vacant seat. David Thiem of Essex Petroleum was not keen for Mansell to drive, and there was much speculation that Jean-Pierre Jarier would fill the second seat. Chapman announced at the start of the season that the seat would be filled by Mansell. Mansell's 4 years as a Lotus driver were a struggle. Cars were unreliable, and he was continually outperformed by teammate Aero De Angelis. He finished 24 out of 59 starts, best finish of third, which he achieved 5 times during the 4 years. And basically, his best result in '81 was third place in his 5th race for Lotus at Belgium. However, 1981 was a very controversial year for Lotus. They tried to race the Lotus 88, which was a twin chassis car. That was outlawed, and they had to revert to the Lotus 81, which they used in 1980, and the newer Lotus 87, which they had to use. Mansell's 82 season was disrupted by injury, but he was offered 50,000. He was being paid £50,000 that year and was offered 10,000 to take part in the Le Mans 24 Hours. Colin Chapman, the head man of Lotus, believed by entering Le Mans, Mansell was exposing himself to unnecessary risk, and because of Mansell's previous injuries, paid him 10,000 not to take part. Chapman extended Mansell's contract to the end of '84, that made him a millionaire. As a result of the gesture, such as the being paid not to race, Mansell became close to Chapman, who made him equal number one with the Andrews, and was devastated by Chapman's sudden death in 1982. In Mansell's autobiography, he stated, "When Chapman died, the bottom of my world, part of me died with him. I lost a member of my family." Following Chapman's death, the relationship at Lotus became strained when Peter Waugh took over from Chapman, did not add a high regard for him as a driver or person. And in Waugh's book, Team Lotus, My View from the Pit Wall, stated that in the '82 season, it was completely clear who was the number one, and it was De Angelis. He was faster, outqualified Nigel 10 times to 3, and not only that, De Angelis had 7-point score finishes to Nigel's 2, in addition to De Angelis' win in Austria, and basically, as near as it reasonably achieved, given two drivers with equal equipment and treatment. And for '83, De Angelis was promoted back to outright number one, and Mansell had to make do with a normally aspirated Cosworth-powered Lotus, whereas De Angelis had to deal with the unreliable Renault Turbo. And it wasn't until the British Grand Prix that Nigel got his turbo, and he proved himself, going from 16th to 4th. But because of the turmoil relationship between Lotus and Mansell, Waugh was not keen to honour the last year of the contract. However, John Player Special wanted a British driver, and it was announced that Mansell would stay for '84, and he finished in the top 10 in his first time in his career, and took pole at Dallas, only for the gearbox to seize in one of the hottest races on record. After 2 hours of driving at 104 degrees F, Mansell fainted while pushing his car to a 6th place finish, which he led half the race starting from pole. At Monaco, Mansell overtook Prost McLaren for the lead, but retired after losing control on the simply painted lines. But later in the year, Lotus decided to sign Ayrton Senna, buying out his £100,000 contract from Tolman, because Senna was on a 3-year deal, leaving Mansell with no race seat. And Mansell received offers from Audi, which he declined. He originally turned down Williams' offer, but would later join Williams. But at the season finale in a Lotus, Peter Waugh refused to give Mansell brake pads for the race, and with Mansell in second position, the brakes on his Lotus failed. Peter Waugh quoted saying that Mansell will never win a Grand Prix as long as I have a hole in my arse. Mansell would have much more success later on, as we explain. In 1985, Frank Williams hired Mansell to drive alongside Keke Rosberg. Mansell later said we had the greatest respect of each other and was given Red 5, which would later be on subsequent Williams cars and later in his Indycar for Newman Haas. Rosberg, who was the world champion in '82, was initially against Williams signing Mansell based on the clash they had at Dallas, and in a race which Rosberg won, while on the podium, publicly berated Mansell's blocking tactics, which earned Rosberg around a boos from the crowd which had appreciated Mansell's courage. Rosberg later said in the 1986 interview that was second-hand information that proved to be false. Drivers found that they got along well, from early in the pre-season and formed a good working and personal relationship. Although the Honda engine would be more competitive by mid-season, it was still getting there. During practice for the French Grand Prix, Mansell broke the record for the highest speed crash in Formula 1 history at the end of the Paul Ricard's 1.8 kilometre long Mistral Straight. At over 200 miles an hour in his FW10, Mansell suffered a concussion which kept him out of the race. Mansell would later take second at Spa, win at the European Grand Prix at Brands Hatch, and then followed it up with another victory in Kyalami. Going to 1986, the Williams team had a car capable of winning regularly, and Mansell had established himself as a potential world champion contender. He had Nelson Piquet as a teammate, and basically Piquet left the Brabham team because of increased unreliability and uncompetitiveness. However, Piquet criticised Mansell, and Mansell later threatened legal action, but Piquet would later retract the statements. In the first race of the year in Brazil, Mansell tried to pass Senna for the lead, only for Senna to chop the door off and put him in the wall, but would play a part in the closest finish with Senna in Spain, mere 0.014 seconds. Mansell later jokingly said they should have given himself and Senna 7.5 points each. It was led mostly by Mansell, and it went down to the wire, having won races in Belgium, France, Britain, as well as Portugal, and let me have a look, and Canada. So, heading into the season finale, 3 drivers are in contention: Mansell, Piquet, and McLaren's Alan Prost at Adelaide in Australia. That meant TV viewers in the UK had to get up at 2:20 in the morning to watch the race. The equation was simple: Prost and Piquet needed to win and have Mansell no higher than 4th, although aiming for a 3rd place finish would guarantee Mansell the title. However, after lapping a back marker, Mansell's left rear tyre exploded on the main straight with only 19 laps to go in the race. In a 2012 interview, Mansell revealed had he hit the ball rather than rested on the car's safety, it most likely would have been red flagged the race as it was over 2/3 distance and kept his position and won the title. Instead, Mansell ended up 1 up to Prost in the McLaren, leading to Mansell being voted Sports Personality of the Year. But it was a tough year for Mansell and the Williams team. After a pre-season test session at Paul Ricard, Frank Williams was involved in a horror crash that left him paraplegic. Williams would not return to the scene to a surprise appearance at the British Grand Prix at Brands Hatch, where Mansell and Piquet finished 1-2. That Williams' absence from the day-to-day running of the team actually caused tension between the team and engine supplier Honda. The Japanese giant regarded Piquet as the team's #1 driver. They had reportedly paid the bulk of Piquet's multi-million-dollar retainer, and happy that the team's co-owner and technical director Patrick Head did not weigh in Mansell during races and allowed him to take points and wins from Piquet. As it was, Williams dominated the Constructors' Championship. Two drivers took enough points from each other to allow Prost to win the drivers. Before the season had started, Honda had reportedly attempted to pursue Williams to replace Mansell with Satoru Nakajima. But Frank Williams was always interested in constructors and drivers, and refused to believe that because the two had proven which were Piquet and Mansell, would serve the team better than Nakajima. 6 more wins followed in 87 for Nigel Mansell, and which included wins at Imola in Italy, France, Britain, Austria, Spain and Mexico. And the victory at Silverstone was popular as he came from 28 seconds behind in 30 laps to beat Piquet, with the car running out of fuel on the slowdown lap. A serious accident at Suzuka in Japan severely injured Mansell's back, a spinal concussion, trying to beat Piquet's that time. Mansell made a mistake and hit a guardrail. Because of Mansell's absence, Piquet was automatically world champion. And Piquet later called his win over Mansell a win of intelligence over stupidity, according to Piquet. The also added that he won because he was more consistent than his teammate, which was Mansell, whacking up points and podiums where Mansell often went into trouble. Piquet was a percentage driving policy which worked well in the Williams, whereas Mansell was a hard charger who many felt often pushed his luck too far, whereas Mansell would later have a reputation of looking after cars. For the first time in his career, Mansell would become team's lead driver in 1988, partnering Riccardo Patrese. However, Ron Dennis of McLaren bought out Frank Williams' engine contract for £24 million, or dollars, and the team had to settle with a Judd V8 engine in its first season. A dismal season where Mansell only finished 2 races, second at Silverstone and second in Jerez in Spain. But the second place at Silverstone was brilliant because Mansell and teammate Patrese persuaded Patrick Head to stop using the active suspension, revert to a passive setup. But Mansell contracted chickenpox in the summer of 1988, but after a competitive but ill-advised drive in the very hot conditions of the Hungaroring and Hungary, it became worse, forcing him to get the Belgian Grand Prix where he was replaced by Martin Brundle, and Italy where he was replaced by Jean-Louis Slesser. Because Mansell missed Italy, he missed the welcome of Tifosi because he had signed for Ferrari in 1989. And Mansell was the last driver personally selected by Enzo Ferrari before his death in August 1988, an honour Mansell described as one of the greatest in his entire career. Ferrari presented a 1989 F40 as a gift to Mansell. In Italy he became Il Leone, the Lion, by Tifosi, because of his fierce driving style. With the banning of turbos, but Ferrari managed to get themselves electrically controlled semi-automatic transmissions. That would cause all sorts of reliability problems most of 89. Knowing that 1989 would be a developmental year, Mansell scored an unlikely win in Brazil, his least favourite track, and the home race of his bitter rival Piquet. Mansell later joked that he booked an early flight home halfway through the race as he predicted his car's new electronic gearbox would only last a few laps as it's done through pre-season testing and in qualifying for the race. First driver to win a semi-automatic gearbox, and the racer was the first driver to win on his debut for Ferrari since Mario Andretti in the 1971 South African Grand Prix, and remained the last man until Kimi Räikkönen won the 2007 Australian Grand Prix to win on debut for Ferrari. But the 1989 season was dogged with reliability problems, mostly with the gearbox, including disqualification in Canada and a black flag incident in Portugal for reversing into pit lane, which resulted in a ban for the following race in Spain. Mansell finished 4th in the championship with the help of a second win for Ferrari at tight and twisty Hungaroring. Mansell had seen that trying to qualify the car on the grid was a pointless exercise and decided to concentrate on a good race setup, off qualifying 12th behind Gail Berger 0.6 seconds behind Berger, who was 6th, and 2.2 seconds behind poleman Patrese, and not even considered a chance for the race, but managed to pull off a move on lap 58 of the race to pass Senna. A tough 1990 followed for Ferrari, with Mansell driving, suffered more reliability problems, forcing him to retire from 7 races. He was paired with Alain Prost, who was also the reigning world champion, and took over as the team's lead driver. Mansell recalled one incident at the 1990 British Grand Prix where he drove did not handle the same as in the previous race where he took pole position. On confronting mechanics, it transpired that Prost saw Mansell having a superior car, and as a result they swapped without telling Mansell. After retiring from the race, he announced his retirement from the sport at the end of the 1990 season. Combined that Prost was not only triple world champion but winner of more Grand Prix in the history, but also spoke fluent English, where Mansell's Italian was only conversational at best, given Prost's greater influence within the Maranello-based team. According to Prost, Mansell only attended 2 or 3 mechanical briefings throughout the season, preferred playing golf. One notable highlight was the daring pass on Gerhard Berger at the daunting high-speed Pel Tarda corner in Mexico for second place, while Prost went on to win. And it was basically registered force of 4.7 Gs during practice. Only one win was Mansell's best in 1990 in Portugal. His retirement plans were halted when Frank Williams again stepped in. Williams signed Mansell on the 1st of October after Mansell was assured the contract would be the focus on, with him being in the team and having experience being the number 2 at Ferrari. Mansell would be paid 4.6 million a season, highest paid sportsman at the time. But it was not straightforward. As long he would only agree to return in 1991 as long as the list demands were met. Undisputed number 1 status over Riccardo Patrese. Guarantees of support wide variety of areas, with each guaranteeing the right and insurance from suppliers such as Renault and Alfa that they would do everything necessary to help him win. Frank Williams said the demands were impossible. Mansell concluded if that was the case he'd be happy to retire. 3 weeks later, the impossible was happening, and Mansell was a Williams driver for the second time. Back in the Formula Red 5, he won 5 races, which were the French Grand Prix, the first at Magny-Cours, British Grand Prix at Silverstone. Despite having gearbox issues in the latter stages, Germany went on to win. In Italy he went on to win, and in Spain. But in Spain he went wheel to wheel with Senna and the McLaren with only centimetres to spare at all over 200 miles an hour. Mansell's victory at Silverstone had a famous slow down lap incident where he gave Senna a lift back to the pits after Senna ran out of fuel. The Williams team's decision to develop the semi-automatic gearbox at the start of the season was at the cost of points in the opening 3 or 4 rounds of the season. Senna was on 40 points from 4 straight wins in the McLaren, whereas Mansell gained his first finish with a second in Monaco. And not only that, rules changes in 91 having races count for all 16 races instead of the best 11. And Mansell could have won in Canada when he had his engine dropped so low and stalled his engine. But in Australia, Mansell was running second when he aquaplaned and basically had a twisted knee which was broken and hurt his neck. Mansell refused to have it operated on because he wanted to make sure that 1992 was a season to be remembered. and he did, winning the opening 5 races in South Africa, Mexico and Brazil with teammate Patrese second. In Spain he had to deal with a chasing young German by the name of Schumacher, and then Patrese again giving him the perfect number 2 in San Marino. The dominance was due to the fact that the FW14 was upgraded to B-spec and had all the semi-automatic gears, traction control and active suspension, which basically I did cover in a previous video or podcast. But the dominance emerged when the best one example was at Silverstone, where Mansell qualified over a second faster than Patrese and 3 seconds faster than Senna. But in Monaco, Mansell took pole and led much of the race. However, Mansell suffered a loose wheel nut and forced in the pits. Behind Senna's McLaren, closed from 5.2 seconds to 1.9 in only 2 laps, duelled, but Mansell could not find a way past, just 2 tenths behind Senna. But Mansell would retire from Canada after trying to pass Senna for the lead on the outside of the final chicane, which back then and then layout was impossible. 1 in France, 1 in Britain, which he surpassed Jackie Stewart's record of 27 wins. 1 in Germany, and was crowned world champion at the age of 39 at the Hungarian Grand Prix, finishing second behind Senna. But Mansell had to do it the hard way. Went from second to 4th behind Patrese and both the McLarens of Senna and Berger. Then passed Berger, couldn't pass Senna, but then Patrese spun off, giving Mansell second. But Mansell had 5 psi in his tyres and had to pit because of a slow puncture. His first overtake was easy because Michael Schumacher spun off the road because of a broken rear wing, then passed Brundle's Benetton, Herbert's Lotus, and then Berger's McLaren, which gave him second place to the championship. Mansell then set the record of 9 wins. Both records stood until broken by Schumacher in 2012. 14 poles in the year, which has only been broken by Sebastian Vettel in 2011. And held up most starts before becoming world champion. Before that record was broken by Nico Rosberg with 206 starts. Other records in 92 that Mansell still holds: pole positions in the season 88%, most wins from pole position 9, and the most run-up finishes before becoming world champion 3. Mansell also holds the record for obtaining pole positions, scoring the fastest lap and subsequently retiring from the race. 87 Germany, 90 British Grand Prix, 92 Japan, 92 Italy. Still the most winningest driver without winning Monaco. During the season, Mansell gained a reputation of physical competitiveness and mind games. After announcing by the FAA that the organisation would be weighing drivers, Mansell, known for not knowing diets, starved and dehydrated himself the day prior to weigh-ins, led to Mansell weighing less than teammate Riccardo Patrese by half a kilo. Despite being world champion, Mansell had a public disagreement with weigh-ins. And Mansell White's, because there was a deal made at the previous Hungarian Grand Prix which Williams reneged on, and the prospect of former teammate Alain Prost joining the team. Despite Mansell's own success in 92, his contract was due to expire at the end of the season. Patrick Head said many years later Mansell pushed for a contract extension to be done early in the season, despite this being unusual for the team. Mansell's perseverance reportedly paid off and met with both Frank Williams and Patrick Head at the Williams Motorhome in Hof when they were testing. where they discussed and shook hands on a deal for a further 2 seasons. This followed up with a written contract done by the Williams team lawyer at the time, which was sent to Nigel's home address in the Isle of Man, but Mansell was living in the US, trying to get himself fit and ready. According to Ed, Mansell promised on returning the signed agreement. However, whilst winning races, Mansell asked for more money, which infuriated and frustrated Ed and Williams and the rest of the Williams team. And because of that, negotiations over money became a problem. And also, according to Mansell, Williams had neglected to tell him that Prost had signed for 93 at only his second race of the season in Mexico. Be similar to the Fridays. Senna expressed some desire to drive for Williams and also drive at no salary, but Prost vetoed it as part of a veto clause, whose rivalry was basically the Senna and Prost rivalry was just as intense as Prost had with Mansell. Had a written clause contract that enabled to block Senna's effort. Williams decided there was little sense in paying the high fees. Mansell went on to demand, told him that they needed to sign on the original deal or Senna was ready to instead. When Mansell discovered to be an untrue Rouse, he decided to move on call press conference to announce his retirement. An 11th hour offer was made to him at Tang Grand Prix, but the damage was done. Retired from F1, moved to the kart series in America, drive for Newman Haas Racing to pair with Mario Andretti. In Australia, for the season opener, Mansell won the race, took pole, but had to come back from a penalty to win. The penalty was because he overtook another former world champion, Emerson Fittipaldi, in a yellow flag zone. A few weeks later, Mansell suffered a crash at Phoenix, injuring his back. Returned at Long Beach, and at Indianapolis he led, but on the restart, the final one, he would lose the lead, only to finish third after Emerson Fittipaldi of Team Penske and Lion Dyke of Chip Ganassi Racing got past Mansell. This was due to Mansell's inexperience of ovals at the time. Mansell would later win at New Hampshire, Milwaukee, and at Michigan, and later at Nazareth, where he would later become kart champion. And basically, following his successful season, included a gold medal from the Royal Automobile Club and the EPSI Award for Best Driver. 1994 was not the best of years. Despite being Indycar Champion 93, Mansell did not have the best of seasons. To pole Surface Paradise and didn't go down well. Took pole at Michigan at fastest ever speed of 235 miles an hour average. But at Indianapolis, his rude behaviour became more apparent as he was welcome in the United States. After he got whacked by Dennis Vitolo, it stormed out, well apparently Mansell stormed out of the hospital, refused medical care, and Dr. J. Pence asked Mansell if he'd spoken with Vitolo. Mansell replied, "You speak to him," and shoved the camera away. Mansell was due to sign autographs at Kmart store, the primary sponsor of his car. The event was eventually cancelled, and Mansell was the catalyst of the breakdown in the relationship between himself and Andretti. Andretti has since remarked Mansell was the worst teammate he ever had. He had a lot of respect for him as a driver, but not as a man. Since Mansell left F1 in 93, Williams underwent changes between 93 and 94. Prost won the title, but retired. Senna joined, but sadly lost his life at Imola. So, Williams had to take on David Coulthard, who was the team's test driver for the majority of the season. So, Bernie Ecclestone managed to buy out Mansell's contract, which he had with Newman Haas to the end of 1997. That meant Williams eventually got to use Mansell for 4 races. The first one was at the French Grand Prix, where he retired from third place with issues, and then Spain, Japan, the European Grand Prix in Spain, Japanese Grand Prix, and the Australian Grand Prix. Mansell was paid $900,000 per race compared to Damon Hill for $300,000 for the entire season. It was because Bernie Ecclestone wanted a world champion driving that season, and with TV audiences starting to decline, and they needed someone as quick as Mansell. The then 41-year-old Mansell was not as quick as Hill's race trim, but sign speeds were coming back, rather than in Japan, where he battled Alesi and finished 4th. Mansell took his final victory was in Australia, having out-qualified Hill and Schumacher, but plan was for Mansell to protect Hill from Schumacher, but both drivers got past him and collided, handing Schumacher the first world title. But after losing the Williams drive, because Mansell had agreed for a 1-year option should they need it, but Williams opted to go for a cheaper option for Coulthard. Mansell went on to sign for McLaren in 1995. But the reason was Mercedes wanted a low-profile driver, whereas title sponsors Marlboro wanted a world champion. It was Mercedes' second year back in F1 since abandonment in 1955. Mansell could not fit in the car because it was mostly affecting his hips and his elbows and could do nothing more than short runs. McLaren test driver Mark Blundell did the opening 2 rounds. Mansell's car was completed in 33 days and in time for Imola, but finished 10th out of the points after Eddie Irvine's Jordan went into the back of Mansell, causing Mansell to get a left rear puncture. Mansell went out of Spain because of car handling characteristics. He chose to retire after 2 races as a team, stating it's not to make the numbers up. And in 2015 he said it was wrong to leave McLaren, and in hindsight should have continued through the season to help improve the car. A 1996 test with Jordan did not go for a comeback, but did 3 BTCC races in 1998. He had previously done the top of shootout in 93, but was knocked unconscious following a crash with 6 laps remaining. But returned to the BTCC in 1998 with races at Donington, Brands Hatch and Silverstone, but retired after that. But then came back out of retirement to race the Grand Prix Masters. Became champion in 05 with 1 race won at South Africa because it was only 1 race. 1 at Qatar in 2006, but retired from Silverstone, which meant Eddie Cheever became champion. Mansell was a shareholder of the series, but the series would later demise. In 2010, Mansell competed at Le Mans, but crashed after 5 laps in the race and suffered a concussion, but Mansell later revealed the accident left him unable to talk or recognise his wife and children. He took up management to recover to get his brain to work in different ways. And he's done several biographies, including IndyCars, not when he competed, and also other stories about why he was racing. So that was the Classic Motorsport Podcast. I'm Gareth Thomas, and this was the story on Nigel Mansell, how he became world champion in 1992, and later the IndyCar Championship in 1993, and all the other stories in between that. Hope you enjoyed it. Thank you for watching. Remember to like, share and subscribe for more great content. Thank you for listening or watching wherever you are around the world, and I hope you enjoyed this podcast, and goodbye.